Well, thank you all very much. I appreciate everybody coming out, including those of you who were brought here against your will. I'm really excited about this book. I'm going to be relatively brief to leave as much time for questions and answers as possible. I think I probably speak for everybody in this room, if not everybody in the country, when I say that, you know, with 5 months to go, this is without question one of the most extraordinary elections in American history. And it's whatever side you're on, it's exciting, it's amazing. It's kind of frustrating at times when you go from, you know, sniper fire to, you know, somebody's preacher to somebody's vice presidential veteran, and it's sort of a controversy a day. But it also, in a lot of ways, makes you proud to be an American. I don't know how many of you all saw the Tom Friedman column in the New York Times the other day, but he was writing from Cairo and was having dinner with some leading Egyptian, you know, political and business leaders, and they said what is happening in America, namely an African American becoming a major party nominee, would never happen in our country. You know, we would not give somebody an opportunity who's part of a minority, you know, to be our leader. And it's hard, you know, to imagine this being possible anywhere but America. And Dark Horse, it has been kind of an interesting journey for me. I actually outlined this book 32 years ago. I was inspired by Eugene McCarthy running for president against Jimmy Carter and Gerald Ford in 1976. I was for Gerald Ford. I think I was the only person who was for Gerald Ford in Stevens County, Georgia in 1976. Apparently I didn't get the memo, you know, that Carter was from Georgia and Georgia was a Democratic state. And so I wanted, as a Republican, Gene McCarthy to get on as many ballots as he could, because as hard as this is to believe today, back then Carter was viewed as a centrist Democrat. And so McCarthy would pull liberal votes from Carter and make it easier for Ford to carry certain states. I specifically remember McCarthy being prevented from getting on the ballot in the state of New York because his ballot access petitions were improperly bundled. He had the requisite number of signatures. He had reached the signature requirement for every congressional district that he was required to do so, but because some signatures from one congressional district were bundled with those from another congressional district, he was kept off the ballot. Some of you may remember that New York was not called for Carter until 3 o'clock in the morning that night. If McCarthy had gotten on the ballot, Ford would have carried New York and with it the presidency. So I was sitting there watching this, and of course this is 15 or 20 years before Ross Perot, and it's 8 years after George Wallace. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, what if somebody could really do this? Could get on all 50 state ballots, was a great political talent, was charismatic and attractive, and could really make a race of it. So I sat down and I outlined the book, and I wrote the first chapter. The first chapter of this book, the actual scenes, are the scenes that I wrote 32 years ago. And after I finished that first chapter, I thought, wait a minute, I'm 15 years old. I don't even know what I'm talking about. I've never even worked on a campaign. I knew that I didn't know enough to get the dialogue right or the character development, so I set it aside. Well, when I was at the Christian Coalition, I couldn't write it because this book is about pro-life and pro-family people of faith leaving the Republican Party and backing an independent. I didn't think it was a good idea to publish that book when I was trying to do the opposite. I didn't think it was a good idea when I was trying to elect and re-elect George W. Bush to write a book about an independent winning instead of a Republican. So it sat there a long time, and long story short, my literary agent, Rick Christian, came to me in September of 2006 and said, I think you ought to write a political thriller. And I said, well, I've got one. And I told him about Dark Horse. And I had the title, and I had the plot, I had everything. Most of the characters I had. and he said, sit down and start writing. And I had no idea when I started writing in the fall of 2006 about a Democratic nomination that goes all the way to the convention, the first African-American major party presidential nominee in history, the first woman to be on the ticket since Geraldine Ferraro in 1984, and a Republican nominee for president with strong national security credentials, tough on terrorism, but who sparks anxiety and indeed a revolt on the right in his own party. I never thought in a million years that I'd be sitting here a year and a half, 2 years later and looking at it. But beyond just the dumb luck of all those things happening and life imitating fiction or vice versa, I'm excited about Dark Horse because of the underlying message of the book, which is really twofold. One is a political message, the other is a spiritual message. The political message is that even though politics is a very tough business, and it's a contact sport, and sometimes it can be a dirty business, and even though a lot of times we get frustrated when we see, you know, what our politics has become. You know, I've got a line in the book that talks about how there was a time when the media was run by the likes of Henry Luce and Bill Paley, and today it's run by the internet smear artists and the bloggers and the attack artists. And there's much in our politics that's discouraging. But I believe very strongly that politics is ultimately a hopeful and an optimistic and an uplifting, a noble undertaking, and that as imperfect as our system is, it is still the best way for a free people and a great people to choose their leaders. And I wanted to convey that, and I think it does come across. And then the second message is a spiritual message, and really the ultimate message of the book, which is found in Genesis chapter 50, where Joseph says to his brothers, who, jealous of his abilities and his father's very special love for him, sold him into slavery. And then, of course, he becomes the agent of their salvation. And there's that beautiful line in Genesis 50, verse 20, where he says, what you meant for evil, God turned for good. And the message of this book is that whether you're Bob Long and you have the nomination of your party stolen from you, or you've experienced defeat or betrayal or disappointment in your life, what others may have intended for evil, God can turn for good if you let him. And it's a great story about how one man falls to his knees and gives up his own ambition and his own desires and yields his life to something greater than himself, and it changes his life and it changes the life of a nation. Let me just take a couple of minutes and talk about 2008, and then I'll open it up for questions and answers. I think if this election is about style and personality, I think it'll be very difficult for John McCain to win. If it's about substance, I think it'll be very hard for Barack Obama to win. And it will really be up to the respective campaigns and us as citizens and citizen actors and participants who decide which of those two prevail. The macro political environment probably favors a Democratic candidate more than at any time in my career. 81% of the American people say the country's headed in the wrong direction. George W. Bush's job approval hovers in the low 30s. If you look at the turnout model, and keep in mind we're 5 months away, so a lot can change. But if the election were held today, according to the Wall Street Journal NBC poll, it would be a 46% Democrat electorate to only 33% Republican. The Fox News poll says it'll be 44% Democrat to 30% Republican. So it's a 13 to 14 to 15 point generic Democratic turnout advantage. In addition to that, the issue mix favors the Democrats. The number one issue in the election today is the economy. Among voters who list the economy as their number one concern, they're currently voting for Obama 59 to 33. So in that sense, it looks a lot more like 1992 than, say, 2000 or 2004. Another big issue, of course, is gas prices and energy, Iraq, and health care. I think at a minimum, 3 of those 4 issues favor the Democrats. You could make an argument that McCain might be able to split it on Iraq, but even that, I think, is uphill. So clearly, the overall political environment favors the Democrats. And left to their own devices, the American people desperately want to elect a Democrat. But it's very unclear that they want to elect Barack Obama. And I think that's the problem, is that Barack Obama, I think the sheen has really come off of him. And I think probably more than Obama, more than McCain, more than anybody else, I think Jeremiah Wright probably did more to energize the conservative grassroots and bring them home to McCain than any other single individual this calendar year. I think when you add into that, in addition to Reverend Wright, and not just him and the things that he said, but frankly the way Obama mishandled it. First of all, sort of half-jokingly saying, hey, everybody's got a crazy uncle in the family that they don't agree with. And then saying, well, I wasn't there for any of those statements, which then raised the question of how often he was there. And then giving the race speech in Philadelphia where he said that I could no more disown Reverend Wright than I could disown the African-American community, which I thought was a fairly startling statement. I don't buy the conventional wisdom that the venomous and the bitter statements that he made are emblematic of the African-American church. I've campaigned with an awful lot of African-American citizens, activists, and men and women of faith. I've been to an awful lot of African-American churches all over this country. When I ran for lieutenant governor, I worshiped in a lot of African-American churches. I have never heard anything like that from a pulpit of any church that I've ever been in. So he clearly mishandled it. And then when you add into that Tony Rezko, Reverend Flagan, and all the other various things that are out there, and then when you add into it the fact that Obama has the rather bizarre distinction of being rated by National Journal as the most liberal member of the U.S. Senate. And keep in mind, this isn't a chamber that includes Ted Kennedy and Bernie Sanders. So it's a very hard distinction to achieve, and he's done it in only 4 years. I think that if John McCain is prepared to run a campaign where he will lay out the stark contrast between where he stands on the issues and where Obama stands on the issues, and if he's prepared to define Obama in a general election environment on those terms, I think McCain can win. And let me just point you to Exhibit A, which is that even though Obama got a bump out of the, winning the nomination and Hillary endorsing him and the Democrats uniting, which was fully to be expected, he got about a 6-point bump out of that. He's currently leading by an average of 5 to 6 points in most national polls. The most recent national poll, the NBC WSJ poll, has him up 47-41, so it's 6 points. Even with that, if you take all the states where Obama is ahead and all the states where McCain is ahead, toss out the toss-up states and accept their leads within the margin of error. Today, with Obama, I would argue, as strong as he's likely ever to be, the Electoral College breaks out 272 for Obama and 266 for McCain. It doesn't get much closer than that. 6 electoral votes. Another point that I would make is that no Democrat from the age of Jackson through the 2004 election has ever been elected president without carrying at least 4 southern states. Clinton did it twice. He did it in different states, but he did it. That's why no Democrat since JFK has been elected who wasn't from either a border or a southern state. Because if you leave the South with a goose egg, you have to carry 76% of all the remaining electoral votes in the rest of the country to win, which is a virtual mathematical impossibility. It leaves no margin for error. You can't lose Iowa. You can't lose Ohio. You can't lose Wisconsin. You can't lose New Mexico. Even a small state of 4 electoral votes makes it very difficult. And while I know Obama says that he's going to try to be more competitive in the South, I challenge anybody to show me the 4 states he's going to carry. I think he'll make Virginia very competitive. I don't think he'll win Georgia. I don't think he'll win Mississippi. He's trailing in Alabama today by 24 points. I think we can safely conclude that McCain will carry Alabama. He's trailing in Florida by 8 points. He's underperforming among Latino voters, which means it's going to be tough for him in Texas, tough for him in Florida. Bush won 53% of the Hispanic vote in Florida. I think McCain will do that well and maybe even better. So all that to say, very close election, too close to call. Buckle your seat belts, and I don't know what will be more bizarre, the plot in Dark Horse or the 2008 election, but I think it'll be close. So thank you all very much for coming, and with that I'll open it up for questions, comments, criticisms. Thank you very much. Yeah.
You mentioned the first 2 sentences of your opening statement that we might be the only country that would elect a black leader.
Well, a minority. It would be a different minority depending upon the country.
That's my point. So with the birth rate in the black community and the propensity of individuals who have a white parent and a black parent to choose the black race, like Lenny Kravitz, Mariah Carey, and Barack Obama, are they still a minority? Do you have the statistics on that?
Well, I mean, it's roughly 11 to 12% of the population. I mean, I think that certainly qualifies as a minority. I think what will be interesting is, can Barack Obama change the denominator? Because if he changes the denominator, he can change the numerator. If he were, say, I do not think that he will carry the state of Georgia, but the Obama people are out there saying to people, hey, there are 600,000 African Americans in the state of Georgia that aren't registered to vote. And if we can register even half of those and turn them out, we know the difference that Jesse Jackson made in the turnout model in the Democratic primaries in '84 and especially in '88. Remember, he won on Super Tuesday. Super Tuesday was supposed to nominate a centrist, moderate, white Southern Democrat. And instead it gave more votes on Super Tuesday to Jesse Jackson. And we certainly saw what Barack Obama did. He changed the math pretty dramatically. And can he do that in a general election? Yes, I think he can. I think he will. I think you'll see the largest turnout of African American voters without question in the history of the country. And it'll make a big difference. So the question then will be, is McCain going to be able to counter that with an effort of his own, which is where I think him building bridges to religious conservatives and other conservatives in his party is so important. Because even though the election may be decided by independents and women, and I think it will be, the reality is the people who are going to knock on the doors, work at the phone banks, and register people to vote, those are going to be your core activists in your party. And 35 to 40% of them are faith-based conservatives, either evangelicals or pro-family Roman Catholics. Right now, in my opinion, they're not sufficiently energized. And I think John McCain, while I think he's making real progress, he's got more work to do in that regard. Yeah, Sean? Yeah, I'm sorry.
With the 600,000 unregistered black voters in Georgia, we're talking Georgia specific, what is the number of unregistered white voters?
I don't know. But you know, again, if you have a very aggressive effort, we increase, when I say we, I mean Bush-Cheney 04. When I was working on the Bush-Cheney 04 campaign, we increased Bush's total in the states that he had carried in 2000 by 20%. If you look at Florida just as the benchmark, he won Florida by 537 votes in 00. In 04, he carried it by 380,000. That's what a good grassroots campaign can do. If you maximize turnout, Bush did it. I think McCain can do it. But he's going to have to make it a major priority. Sean? Yeah.
Ralph, is the
Right.
You know, do you see him or the party outlining, you know, how he wanted to solve this problem in Colorado and Florida? And the ironic twist on how this could be an advantage for him.
Oh, I think it's clearly an advantage in a general election environment. I mean, what hurt him in the primary, you know, his co-sponsorship of comprehensive immigration reform is going to help him in the general. Today, and I don't remember which poll it is, but I think it's the CBS New York Times poll. He's getting 38% of the Hispanic vote today. There's only been one Republican in the modern era who got a higher percentage of the Hispanic vote than that, and that was George W. Bush in 2004. That's the same percentage that Reagan got in 1984. So if he can do that and overperform among Hispanics, where Obama had, let's face it, serious problems in the primaries. Obama's underperforming among downscale voters. He's underperforming among voters making less than $50,000 a year. He's underperforming among voters without a college degree. He's underperforming among Latinos. So, you know, it's there for McCain. But, you know, it's going to require some real skill. If he can pull this off and win in an environment where the generic Democrat has a 14-point lead, this is going to go down as one of the best-run presidential campaigns of the modern era. And I think it's doable. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that evangelicals weren't galvanized like they need to be for a McCain victory. Do you think that that has anything to do with a lot of evangelical leaders who aren't overtly political these days, really popular guys like Joel Osteen?
No. No, I think there's always been, in a community this big, and in 2004 it was 24 million voters. So you're talking about 1 out of every 4 to 1 out of every 5 voters. This is a huge community. And it embraces everybody from, you know, Rick Warren and Joel Osteen and Bill Hybels to, you know, Pat Robertson and John Hagee. It's a big community. And those of us who are in the community get the joke that not any one individual represents the whole community. It's big, it's diverse, and that's good. That's a sign of strength. I think that it's just a hangover from McCain's difficulties with the community going back to the 2000 race, McCain-Feingold, and so forth. But he's overcoming it, and I believe he will ultimately do very well among these voters. If you look at, I was looking at a poll that Glenn Bolger did the other day, who is Governor Perdue's pollster and who I've used both at the party and in my own campaign. He's got McCain today getting 87% of the Republican vote and 65% of the evangelical vote. That's not where Bush was, but keep in mind, if we were having this conversation in June of '88, before the quail pick, before the Read My Lips, No New Taxes speech, before the New Orleans Convention, George H.W. Bush wouldn't have been doing as well. What did he get? 82% of the evangelical vote. Now, he had the good fortune to run against Michael Dukakis. John McCain isn't going to get that lucky. But if he does his job, I predict he'll get north of 70%. And that's all he needs to do. Because remember, half of these voters live in the South. 47% of all self-identified evangelicals who attend church once or more a week, live in the South. So if he gets 70% or more among that vote, the South is gone for Obama. He'll carry a solid South, and then he can move on to Ohio. Yeah.
Just a quick question. You were talking a while ago about activities that Republicans have taken part in over the years, like phone banking and knocking on doors and things like that. It seems to me like at least until 2 years ago, Republicans kind of had the leg up on the Democrats when it came to grassroots activities.
Right.
Democrats were kind of playing catch up. I had an interesting conversation a couple of weeks ago with the Democratic state senator here in the state of Georgia, who has been supporting Obama since the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he intimated to me that they had a kind of an overt organization here in the state of Georgia where they had people who were coming in from out of state that were going to volunteer to just begin to register African American voters in mass.
Right.
If Obama has kind of read the tea leaves and seen what Republicans have done in the past and is kind of trying to apply the lessons learned in the past, does that change things here in the state or anywhere else in the United States?
Well, in Georgia, I think it's clearly going to be more competitive than it was in '04, but I mean, it wasn't competitive in '04. I mean, John Kerry couldn't come to Georgia except to raise money. And, you know, outside of the trial bar, I don't think John Edwards could campaign in Georgia. So, you know, we sort of got lucky with our opponents in '04. That's a really artificial benchmark. I mean, we shouldn't really measure McCain or Obama against '04. It's probably better to look at where Georgia was before. Remember that we were a battleground state in '92, and Clinton carried it narrowly. We were a battleground state again in '96, and Dole narrowly carried it. Then we were a battleground state in '00 until Gore picked Lieberman, and then it started to drift away. But Bush and Gore were both on TV in Georgia in the summer. So Georgia will be more competitive. It's just going back to where it has really been until '04. I still think that McCain will carry it, though.
In terms of quality of staff and efficiency, which candidate has the better?
Well, I think I don't really know the Obama people that well. I don't really know David Axelrod, so it's hard for me to comment on. I think that they clearly ran a very impressive primary campaign. Very impressive. I mean, they got the joke that you needed to run everywhere. That, I mean, I know it sounds obvious, but you'd be amazed how many people don't do that. They go, well, we're going to run in Iowa, we're going to run in New Hampshire, and then if we do well then we'll go everywhere else. Well, too late. If you win Iowa or New Hampshire and you wait until then to build organizations on Super Tuesday, you're done. And so they understood that, including, by the way, the caucus states. That's where Obama really won the nomination, was among superdelegates and the caucuses. Let me just give you one data point on that. On Super Tuesday, when Hillary Clinton was winning New Jersey by 18 points, she came out of New Jersey with a net gain of 9 delegates. The same night in Nebraska, where Hillary didn't even go, didn't even compete, Obama won all 9 delegates. So he made up everything he lost in one of the largest states in the country in a caucus that almost nobody attended and where his opponent didn't even compete. That was smart. The only thing that was better luck for him was that they were dumb enough, you know, not to compete in the caucus states. I think McCain's got a good team. I mean, I know most of his team. You know, Rick Davis, Charlie Black, Steve Schmidt, a lot of those guys I work with on the Bush campaigns. I think they're really good. And I think they understand that this is going to be a campaign. It'll be disconcerting to conservatives at times, but this campaign is going to be decided by swing voters and independents and women. It's not going to be decided by who can turn their base out more, although you need to turn your base out. Having said that, I don't think Obama is off to a good start in the general election. You know, I don't think he's off to a good start. Rufus?
Can you talk briefly about the money? I mean, there was a time when we used to clean the Democrats' clock with the small donors. I think it's kind of reversed in terms of what he's done. But can you talk briefly about the potential of the Obama campaign from a fundraising perspective and how that will affect you?
It's a great question, and I don't think we'll know until we're done. But I would posit that 08 may be to the Internet what 1960 was to television. This could be our first true Internet election. In 2000, at the Bush campaign, we had 300,000 unique emails from beginning to end. 300,000. Think about it in a presidential campaign. In 2004, we had 7 million unique emails. And we had 2 million volunteers, almost all of whom signed up on the Internet. Just out of curiosity, how many people in this room volunteered with Bush Cheney 04? And how many of you signed up online? So, you know, 2/3 of them. Obama today has 1.5 million donors or volunteers, and it's almost all Internet driven. And the money's pouring in with virtually no fundraising costs. And when I started writing Dark Horse in the fall of '06, I thought that might happen. I think Dean had a chance to do it, but he didn't really do it. Kerry actually did extremely well. A lot of people forget Kerry raised $85 million online in '04. And Bush raised $285 million as an incumbent president Kerry raised $255 million. That's pretty good, running against an incumbent president. So in Dark Horse, I have a scene where Bob Long, the independent candidate, announces, and he raises $14 million in, like, 8 hours. And that's about what, Obama's doing that. And I think it's going to change our politics. And whoever learns how to win campaigns with the internet is going to dominate politics for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
McCain is notoriously allergic to religion. How can you possibly motivate and inspire religious conservatives?
I don't really think that that's true. I think I've
Example of something otherwise?
well, I've talked to a good friend of mine who is a good friend of his, who has talked to him about his faith, and I think he's very serious about his faith, and regularly attends, and I think is a member, I believe. Don't quote me on this. You might want to do your own reporting, but I believe he's a regular attender, and in fact is a member of a Southern Baptist church in Arizona. But McCain doesn't really talk about it as openly as, say, George W. Bush did, or Jimmy Carter when he ran in '76, or even like Barack Obama does. But I think he ought to just be himself. He shouldn't try to be somebody other than what he is. And I don't think evangelical or pro-family Catholic voters will ask him to. What they want to know is, are you pro-life? Will you fight for my values? Do you care about the issues I care about? And if you get a vacancy on the Supreme Court, are you going to appoint somebody in the model of Alito or Roberts? If the answer to all those things is yes, they're a lot less interested in his theology than they are where he stands on the issues. Yeah, Narendra? Maybe 2 more questions, and then I don't want to hold anybody all night.
The
Yeah.
demographics in the country are changing very fast.
Yes.
And so far, Republicans are never making inroads into the ethnic groups, any ethnic group, including the high-income groups like Indian Americans.
Right.
So if they're going to count on only whites, how long the Republican Party can be in power in the future? The second question is, in the Dark Horse, you described certain cocktails very nicely. I know that
Well, somebody asked me how I was able to describe women's fashion as well as I was in the book, and I have to really give the credit for that to Joanne, because she keeps me up to date on all the various labels. But yeah, I tried to have fun with it. So it's got a spiritual message, but it shows politics the way it really is, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. Look, it's a serious problem for the Republican Party, that the Republican Party needs to make a higher priority. I mean, Anglos as a percentage of the population are shrinking. And, the Georgia that I grew up in 35 years ago doesn't exist anymore. I grew up in a state that was 25% African American and 75% white. And I don't have the exact 2000 census numbers in front of me, but I think by the year 2025, our state's probably going to be 20% black and probably 10 to 12% or higher Hispanic. And there'll be a large number of Asian Americans and Indian Americans. And, we're going to be, if you saw what happened to Florida and Texas in the 70s and 80s, that's what's happening to states like Virginia, North Carolina, and Georgia. And if the Republican Party wants to be competitive and wants to be a majority party, it has to embrace every one of our citizens. And I'm very optimistic, having grown up in Florida before we moved to Georgia when I was a kid, that the idea that somebody of a different ethnic background or a different national origin or a different race than me doesn't share my values, I totally reject that. I think the values of hard work, individual initiative, entrepreneurship, self-reliance, faith in God, patriotism, those values belong to every single American. And we need to go out there and make the case. And we made that a major priority in 2002 when I was state party chairman. And the result was that Saxby-Chambliss carried, I think, 40% of the Hispanic vote in Georgia. And if Republicans can keep making that a priority, I think they can continue to be a majority in the state. One last question. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, two questions. First of all, to what extent...
No, only one. I said one question. No, I'm kidding.
Be important both for McCain or Obama, and also your next...
Well, I'm sorry, what was the first question?
Energizing the younger voters.
Right.
And then also your next book, will that be another thriller? Fiction, nonfiction? Surely you have it working in the back of your mind.
Well, you need to let me recover from this one first. The young people, right now are leaning for Obama, and I think to some extent, although I'm not happy about this as a Republican, I think that's kind of baked in the cake. I think he's kind of captured this JFK sort of Camelot flavor, and I was on the campuses when that happened for our guy, when Reagan got that. I mean, Reagan was the oldest man to run for president at the time, and he won the 18 to 24-year-old vote overwhelmingly. I think Obama is going to do very well among young voters, but I don't think McCain should concede a single vote. I think he should go out there and fight for every vote that he can, and the reason why, and why I personally think it would be good if he could pick a vice presidential running mate that was, conservative, attractive, and preferably younger, to go out there and make that case. Because sociologically speaking, however you vote in your first election is statistically how you're going to vote most of your life. However people get politically socialized between 18 and 25 is how they usually remain. I fell in love with a guy named Ronald Reagan when I was 18, and I'm probably never going to change. And that we know from all kinds of polling data that's the case. So if we concede a whole generation to Obama, we pay long-term consequences, and we shouldn't do that. But the other side of the coin is Obama is underperforming badly among senior voters. And we have with us tonight Stuart Barton with the American Seniors Association, which is a conservative alternative to AARP. They're going to be doing a lot of nonpartisan voter education. I worked in the plug, Stuart. Didn't even have to be asked. And if he does as badly among voters over the age of 60 as he did in the primaries, he doesn't have a chance of carrying Florida. I'll tell you that right now. So it may be counterbalanced by the senior vote. Next book, I don't know. But I don't want to ruin the story for you, but this ending sets up a sequel. So we'll see. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. I appreciate you being here.